Chris Cuomo has apparently been shit canned at CNN. He is suspended indefinitely over his involvement not only in coaching his brother Andrew through the sexual harassment scandals, but by apparently trying to dig up dirt on people who came forward and accused him. According to a report, after it was reported that Andrew Cuomo had made an inappropriate advance on a woman at a wedding reception, Chris Cuomo texted DeRosa, who was one of his brother's aides, Melissa DeRosa, quote, "I have a lead on the wedding girl." And so he has now been suspended indefinitely from CNN. It's beginning to look a lot like Christmas.
That's what you said. Yes, Christmas came early this year.
This is section 1 on the Due Dissidents 2021 Advent calendar. If we were to make an Advent calendar of all the things
he didn't like
celebrate each day.
I am very surprised they got rid of him, because the average CNN show draws 3 people and he was getting 6.
Yeah, he was a big cash cow for the network.
It was a big draw for them. They should have fired him in the first place. It was ridiculous that they didn't. It was obviously a conflict of interest. But it's the same network that allowed him to do prop comedy with his governor brother through COVID in the first place without talking about all the elderly who died in nursing homes because of his brother's policies. So it's hardly surprising that they bent the rules. This was just too much. They just couldn't. If they could have, they would have. If they could have just turned a blind eye to this, they would have. But they just couldn't. It was too over the top for a network that laughably tries to build its brand around kind of being the grown-ups in the cable newsroom, the old school journalist, objective journalists, which they're obviously not, but that's how they try to brand themselves. So they couldn't let this go. Like MSNBC, doesn't matter. Joy Reid could write all the homophobic shit that she wants. Their viewers don't care. But with CNN, it runs counter to their brand to not have suspended them at this point.
Well, the one thing about Joy Reid is that her homophobic tweets were years in the past. The other thing that killed Cuomo this time was that this was a very, very recent story. This was a very recent example of malfeasance on his part. And so, yeah, they had to shit can him. What I found myself saying to myself...
With Joy Reid, I always felt the cover-up was worse than the crime. I don't feel she should have been... People can evolve, sure, but she lied about it. She lied to the network. She lied to the public. She lied to the FBI.
Well, in that case, you're right. I mean, in that case, yeah, that none of that matters to MSNBC or its audience. I mean, right. Who the hell cares, right? But because of that, partly actually, is why I found myself reacting the same way to this Chris Cuomo story as I've reacted to a lot of different stories. And it's the kind of thing where, like, I've said this phrase to myself so often, and I've probably said this phrase on the show so often. You ever say something so often, so over and over again, that you kind of become self-aware when you say it because it just feels cheap and hacky to say it again and empty? Yeah. You're like, to say, why do I got to say this again for? But
it's your... I'd like to see how your hair would fare in a blizzard.
Right, exactly.
How does she feel when she says that?
You know, I felt when this came out, I said, this is why Donald Trump won the election in 2016. And this is why liberals couldn't handle it in 2016. Because stories like this just indicate that as sort of odious as Donald Trump may be as a human being, he's not particularly odious given his peers in politics and in media. And liberals just don't understand that, because liberals believe that guys like Chris Cuomo are honest newsmen.
Yeah.
So, like, I had friends on election night 2016 who were crying, who were sobbing, because a man had just been elected president who was on tape bragging about grabbing women by the pussy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Now, a lot of them didn't know at the time, and some of them knew and pushed it out of their mind, didn't want to deal with the fact that the person they voted for headed up a wing of her husband's presidential campaign that was specifically tasked with managing quote unquote bimbo eruptions.
Yeah.
The bimbos, quote unquote, were women who had sexual relations with Bill Clinton, some consensual, but some not. Included in those bimbos were people who had credibly come forward and said, or maybe they hadn't come forward yet. That was the point of the task force, is to make sure they didn't come forward. Yeah. But they had very credible stories about how Bill Clinton either harassed them, assaulted them, or even raped them.
Yep.
And the candidate you supported decided that because she wanted to be president someday, she was going to cover up for his crimes. She was not an enabler to Bill Clinton. She would have been an enabler to her husband if her husband were a fucking alcoholic and she bought him a bottle of Jack Daniels every week. Helping someone get away with rape makes you an accessory to a crime. You're not just an enabler. You're an accessory to multiple sex crimes, which is what Hillary Clinton is. Mm-hmm. And not only is she guilty of that, but the entire media complex was complicit in helping hide that from the American people. And they were only so successful. Most people pretty much understood that, which is why when the tape came out where Donald Trump is saying, yeah, when you're a star, you can do whatever you want. Right? People were put off by that, but that wasn't a deal breaker to them because of the moral obscenity that his opponent represented and that the media complex supporting his opponent represented. Chris Cuomo was, of course, a giant part of that. And now he is on tape as if this couldn't get any more like an inception of liberal delusion, right? The guy who's complicit in putting forth the narrative that Donald Trump is a unique moral obscenity is guilty of the same thing that Hillary Clinton was guilty of, is guilty of the same thing that probably a lot of people in Trump's inner circle are guilty of, stopping women from coming forward against him. Woman says he sexually harassed me at a wedding. He texts Cuomo's aide, I got a lead on the wedding girl. I know how we can discredit the wedding girl.
Yeah.
So most people look at this and they say, yeah, Trump is a scumbag, but so is his opponent. So is the whole media. They're all a bunch of scumbags. And to a certain extent, I think politics and media does favor like hyper testosterone scumbags. Like there's a certain hormonal thing here for like people who want power over people or people who are really want to compete for the prime time slot on a big network. I think their hormones are such that like, yes, they are hyper aggressive. Some of them are hyper sexually charged.
It's true in politics too.
Right. Exactly. It's both. It's both. And so the point is like, this is the same machine that tried to convince people that Donald Trump was a unique moral evil. And the only people who bought that were the people who believed that guys like Chris Cuomo were giving them the straight dope. And so now this is just a bullshit story that's kind of folding in on itself where Chris Cuomo has to step down because he's guilty of a lot of the same shit that people were so upset that, oh my God, we elected a president who says you could do whatever you want because you're a star, you know?
Yeah. Whereas they all behave that way. That's the way I feel when I hear people talking about Donald Trump as a racist, which he is, but look who you elected. You elected who did more harm to people of color. It's not even close. It's not even a comparison. If anything, Trump helped in some small way. You know, he signed the First Step Act, the first thing ever to start to undo the sentencing guidelines that Biden had created. He created the first permanent funding for historically Black colleges and universities. People of color had historically low unemployment under Trump. And that's kind of the business cycle. I wouldn't necessarily give him credit for that, but it happened to coincide with his presidency, which is something liberals don't want to look at when you look at how the Republicans are winning over people of color, because they were doing better under Trump than under Democrats. Right. That was in my article about, progressives hacking the Republican Party. When Democrats are in office, they usually do more harm to those communities than Republicans do in office for a couple of reasons. One, for Republicans, there's an electoral logic to peeling away even 2% of that vote because they have the white vote
Right.
locked down. So if they get even 2% of that vote, whereas Democrats figure that we've already got that vote, we don't need to do anything for those people. And also, when Republicans propose legislation that's obviously racist, it's covered that way in the media. The
Right.
Democrats make a stink about it. When the Democrats propose something like that, the media will ignore it. They certainly, if they cover it at all, they won't frame it that way. So how do you talk about, well, where somebody said to me the other day, well, people of color are better off now than they were under Donald Trump. I said, how? How? Please. I mean, I want to know. In
Right.
what way are they better off now than they were under Donald Trump? I don't see it. I based on what happened in Virginia, where Youngkin won the Latino vote straight out and did better with African Americans. I think a lot of people don't feel that way.
Thank you, everybody, for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe wherever you saw it, on YouTube, on Rumble, or on Facebook. We have channels on all three of those platforms. Also, consider helping us create more content by becoming a member at patreon.com/do dissidents or on Facebook, where you can become a supporter right through our Facebook page and get bonus content every week, as well as call-in access to our live stream shows. Thank you very much for your continued support.